Welcome back to the ITWeb Security Summit. Here in studio we have Jason Jordaan. He is the principal forensic analyst at with the Science Institute. Jason, welcome. Thank you for being with
Thanks
us.
very much. Yeah, it's great to be here again.
It's good to see you and to have you at the conference. Jason, you are a principal forensic analyst. What do you do? What is
So I suppose in a nutshell, I catch bad guys and bad girls because equal opportunity. So I investigate cybercrime cases, looking at digital evidence, not just cybercrime cases, but any kind of case that requires digital evidence for court purposes. So besides, like I said, looking at it from going to court, but we also do digital forensics when we're responding to security incidents to figure out what went wrong. So it's kind of a twofold path, if I could put it that way. On one hand, I potentially go to court, to testify in cases that we've got investigations on. On the other hand, it might be investigating a security breach that happened to figure out what actually went wrong and how the breach occurred, so that we can better secure the organization going forward.
And could you just, I don't know if you can share some interesting, insights around the cases that you've investigated in?
Oh wow, yeah. So there's been lots of cases I've investigated over the years. I think the most interesting one that I investigated was a case involving, I was still working in government at the time. It was an individual working for the State Information Technology Agency who was responsible for facilitating a large hack against the Department of Education, Department of Safety and Security, and Department of Health in the Limpopo province. And this guy was responsible for stealing a significant number of the amount of money, so in the millions that he'd actually stolen. And it was quite a nice investigation in terms of the complexity of the case, how we sort of identified the guy, put all the evidence together. But for me, what was the most satisfying about that case is, to date, it still is the longest sentence for hacking in South Africa. We got a 25-year direct jail term for him. So that was a really nice case to work on, kind of a history-breaking case. But there's been tons, and we could be here for like 10 days talking about cases. Yeah.
You said 25 years, so that's the longest that
25
investigator
years,
was.
yeah.
Oh, okay, that's quite interesting. You think, but Jason, like today, a lot of the theme, one of the main themes that we've been seeing is around upskilling
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the cybersecurity skills challenge
Yeah.
that we face here in South Africa. What I wanted to find out from you is like, what do you think needs to happen to actually address this? How bad is the situation, and what needs to happen to address
Well,
this?
I think the skills challenge in South Africa is interesting, and I think I'm going to sort of look at it first from a ground level perspective. I think one of the challenges we have in South Africa is just around general education. So children coming through the school system don't go into maths, they don't go into the science fields, and those areas are pretty important areas for ultimately moving into IT and those kind of fields. So I think we're losing a significant pool of talent because our school system is failing our learners. So I think as society, we should be more insistent on government actually really capacitating our schools and making sure that our pupils and our teachers are adequately addressing those things. Then I think the next sort of level up is where the people enter the workforce. That skill shortage there is that a lot of training in cybersecurity is horribly expensive, and people sort of believe that without training they can't get a job in the field. So some people get put off getting into it. So it's kind of a twofold. One is we don't have a sufficiently big pipeline of people getting into the field, and then of those people that do get in through that initial school pipeline, they don't always have the opportunity to then go do the training that they think they need to actually get into the field. So I think those are two really, really big challenges that we face at the moment.
And in your experience, what's the earliest at school level that young learners and pupils get exposed to a career in cybersecurity?
Well, I think it really starts probably in. I've got to try and think back to grades now, but I think it probably starts at around about a grade 7 level, sort of grade 6, grade 7 level, where you start to sensitize people to general cybersecurity, and and again, maybe even younger, especially if you consider the rate of implementation of social media amongst young people these days. Now look at things like TikTok and all these other social media platforms. We have kids exposing themselves to security issues at a much younger age than what we did, as adults. And I think you need to expose them at an early age to the security dangers of cyber, the cyber domain, and then start to capacitate that from protecting myself to, hey, this is an interesting career. This is how I could get into things going forward. So I think probably start at a primary school level with awareness and then build on that at a more technical level. Now look at a subject like life orientation, for example. We don't have hardly any cybersecurity awareness in life orientation, and that I would imagine would be a critical skill for us to actually have these days. Yeah, because it's a life orientation thing.
Yeah. Also, I suppose it's interesting that parents could also maybe, how would parents prepare their kids? What would you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's also part of the challenge is that we have a lot of parents who, especially because of our history in South Africa, is you have a lot of parents that haven't grown up in the same environment as their children have grown up and may not understand the technologies as well. So in a sense, the children become the teachers of the parents, where it should be the other way around. So I think we also have to upskill the general populace around cybersecurity. I always make this joke. We all know the dodgy places that we're not supposed to go walk at in the middle of the evening, but when it comes to cyberspace, we don't think about that. So we need to take those skills that we've learned as South Africans in the physical world and just translate those into the sort of cyber world.
I like that. I like that analogy. And Jason, just to go back to like the skills pipeline, how can private and public sector coordinate themselves, because there's a lot of conversations around that things are happening in silos wherever they are happening. How can they better coordinate themselves to try to build that pipeline?
I think you hit the nail on the head that one of the big challenges is bringing the private and public sector together. The reality is when it comes to this kind of skills development, and with all due respect to the state, a lot of the expertise doesn't sit in the state. It now sits in the private sector, unfortunately. And again, I've seen that having been in government, you would upskill people and then they get poached to go into the private sector. So I understand that dynamic. So the skills sit in the private sector largely, but the funding sits in government. So we need to find a mechanism of bringing government and the private sector together and say, let's work together to solve a common problem. We often think of, for example, it's the state's responsibility to deal with crime, and that's largely sort of put forward by the government as well. It's our job to deal with crime, and I say it's actually all of our jobs to deal with crime. Same thing in the cyber domain. So if it's all of our jobs to deal with crime, then we as organizations in the private sector have a responsibility to help the public sector, not necessarily by paying for it, because I don't think that really solves the problem, but it's providing the skills, the expertise, and the capability, and then government through their strategic initiatives saying, here is funding, here are programs that we could do. And I've seen that happen in a number of countries overseas where I've done engagement. So I look at the United Arab Emirates, for example, that invested significantly from a government perspective now in terms of upskilling their kids, starting at a school level, finding the right talent. They would have summer holidays or winter holidays, and they would enroll kids on cyber camps, and they would do like a 1 week training program, like a real fun, like training program. But they were learning cyber skills, and then they would develop that further as they developed in school until eventually the cream of the crop were identified, and then moved into actual jobs in cybersecurity. And now, if you look at the UAE, they have one of the most sophisticated cybersecurity markets in the Middle East, and it's simply because the government invested heavily in the skill, brought in the private sector expertise to actually run the programs and develop it, but they had the strategic vision foresight to say, we want to develop top line cybersecurity specialists. If I look at South Africa, which is routinely identified as one of the most targeted cyber countries in the world when it comes to cybercrime stats, we should be doing that.
Yeah, quite interesting. And Jason, there was a comment that was made in your session earlier around that in South Africa doesn't necessarily have a cybersecurity skills challenge, but rather an absorption issue. What is your take on that?
I don't think I necessarily agree with the statement that there's a skills challenge. I think there is a skills challenge. We do have more job or more vacancies, if I put it that way, than we have people that are currently capable of. What we do have is we have a huge potential. So I think if I look at the person that asked the question, and I kind of looked at it from that perspective, it's not about skill shortage. We have huge potential in this country. Our potential is amazing, but we have a skill shortage because we don't nurture the potential to develop the potential into skills. And I think that's the challenge. And part of that is the absorption problem because you have organizations that actually expect to take somebody on board who's fully formed. So if you think about it, in most organizations, when you hire for a particular job, you expect that person to come with a certain level of skills. And usually because that person has gone to school, studied, maybe they've studied a trade or a vocation, maybe they've gone to university, depending on what job they're going to fill. But with cybersecurity, we don't have enough degree programs, we don't have enough industry programs, we don't have that. So we don't have the luxury in South Africa of just hiring fully formed specialists. We need to grow them ourselves. And I think part of the challenge that we face in South Africa, and something that I've seen, is a lot of organizations are reluctant to do that because the argument is, well, if I train this person and I capacitate them, then they're going to go somewhere else. And that's, I think we've got to break that mindset in South Africa because here's the thing, and I've had that happen to my own organization. I've trained analysts who've gone on to other positions. But the way I look at it is that I've trained that person with skill and knowledge, and they've taken that skill into another organization, and that organization is now made to defend it. Yeah, the impact that I've made in my organization by training up a person has now benefited the country as a whole. Maybe it has benefited me because I've lost the skill, but I've got to look at it holistically because this whole cybercrime issue is not just a target against an organization. It's a target against our way of living, our entire society. So society has a responsibility to deal with it.
And Jason, maybe like just as a final word, for and what would say to encourage young people out there to get into this, considering some of the points that you raised?
So for somebody that wants to get into forensics in general, especially digital forensics, be a good problem solver. Be curious. Tackle problems. I want to see when I recruit for potential, I want to see can you solve problems. I've recruited people with no IT degree, no IT qualification, but they have the ability to challenge the status quo for problems. And then if somebody has a good IT background, good technical IT background, that's really, really good. And then once you've got in the door, then we'll provide those other skills, the law skills and the investigation skills. But it's those two core things for me. If you want to get into this field, be passionate about IT, go and play, go and experiment, go figure out how things work, go break things. I broke lots of things as a kid, so my late mother was still here to tell you stories about me taking apart electronics and then